Um, Hello. Now, in this brief study in John's Gospel, we will turn to passages in chapter 6, and the title of this study is Identity of Disciples in John's Gospel. We saw in the previous John's Gospel video that there was an evangelistic campaign, definitely in chapters 3 and 4 recorded, in which many disciples were made. More, in fact, than the disciples of John the Baptist. And so we see in John's Gospel that there were evangelistic campaigns in which disciples were gathered. Well, what about the identity of these disciples? Well, a disciple is one who is willing to learn, and in the case of both John's and Jesus' disciples, they have been baptized, which signifies a number of things, but among the other things, not to be complete about the significance of baptism, it refers to an allegiance to the leader. In John's campaign, John; in Jesus, Jesus himself, in whose name the disciples of Jesus baptized. Now we turn in John chapter 6, and I read from verses 58 onward a bit. To start with, Jesus says something in his discourse at the synagogue at Capernaum, and we shall find that what he says here is a little challenging. He says, "This is the bread which came down from heaven, not such as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever." This he said in the synagogue as he taught at Capernaum. Many of his disciples, when they heard of it, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it?" But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples murmured at it, said to them, "Do you take offense at this?" Then, skipping a few verses, verse 44. There are some of you that do not believe. For Jesus knew from the first who those were that did not believe, and who it was that should betray him. And he said, as he had earlier in John 6, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." All right. After this, many of his disciples drew back and no longer went about with him. Jesus said to the 12, "Will you also go away?" And to be brief about it, Simon answers in the name of all that they are staying. They are going to continue to follow after him and hear his teaching. And this somber note upon which chapter 6 closes, Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is the devil?" He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was to betray him. We must read this, I think, in view of the fact that we need to make our understanding of Bible terms what the Scriptures teach us, not what we assume. These disciples of Jesus now, who were made in the evangelistic campaign that the previous video concerned? Were they all sincere disciples who truly believed, who persevered with Jesus till the end? Well, it is clear from the verses I have read, there are disciples who, before this point, seemed as good disciples as any who Jesus had, who, number one, by Jesus' evaluation, did not believe, and number two, eventually the challenge of what Jesus was teaching proved to be too hard for them, and they stopped being disciples of Jesus. So on the basis of John's Gospel and what we read about discipleship in here, in John's Gospel, we cannot say that a disciple of Jesus is necessarily a sincere disciple. And that's basically the point that I wanted to make. Oh yes, one more point. Sometimes it's implied that if there is a problem with the fruit of evangelism, that is, in other words, those who are gathered in evangelism, this is because of lack of clarity, lack of faithfulness on the part of those who do the evangelism, who preach the word. Well, it might be, but not always. You know, back to the John chapter 3 and 4 passage, we were talking in the previous video about an evangelistic campaign under the direct supervision of Jesus and his apostles. I do not think we should assume they made any mistakes in terms of who they baptized on that occasion and admitted as disciples, and some of whom I do not doubt are among these in John chapter 6, who proved to be those who Jesus describes as some who do not believe and who ceased from being disciples of Jesus at all due to the challenge. It was not a mistake to admit them as disciples in the first place. But of this, perhaps there will be more in future study videos I make. Thank you for your time. Till next time.